What's up, guys? So we have some sweet glute information coming for you today. I, of course, am Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach, and this is Mei Ling, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, Mei Ling NG. You may see me on Wonder Woman, Scorpion King, and upcoming Suicide Squad manga. Play a lot of superheroes and warriors and martial artists. So look out for me.
Sweet. And we're going to be taking you guys through some glute stuff. We're going to have Mei Ling demoing, and hopefully you guys can learn some stuff and pick up some tips along the way. And check out both of our channels. Hit some like buttons, some subscribe buttons, share with some friends, and hopefully you guys enjoy the series.
Definitely subscribe to me. I know where you live. I'll come and find you.
She can beat you up. True story.
I will.
All right, guys, so one of my favorite exercises for glutes, so this is why this is number one. Doesn't mean it's really better than the other ones, but it's a very efficient movement because it trains the glutes through a lot of range of motion, won't quite get them fully lengthened. So we're gonna be doing an RDL variation. Realize when you run out of length in an RDL variation, it's probably more to do with your hamstrings and your rectus femoris. Your hamstrings are fully lengthened, your rectus femoris is fully shortened. So most of the time when you run out of length, it's because either the hams won't get longer or because the rectus femoris can't contract any shorter. So what has you run out of hip flexion is going to be one of those two muscles. So realize all I mean by that is if this is the end of my hams and my rec fem, my glutes could actually get more lengthened. So just realize that's the difference. If I actually bent my knee, changed the length of the rec fem and the hamstring, I could get more hip flexion. So I just want to clarify real quick, this doesn't fully lengthen the glutes, but it's probably the rest 80% of their full contractile range. So very efficient exercise, a lot of range of motion, and really loads right in kind of that mid-range. So I think it's very important to really load all muscles in their mid-range because that's where they can produce a lot of force. So basically this is going to be performed exactly the same as a normal RDL. The only difference is we're adding a band across the hips. And there's two purposes of that really. One, I think it's a great learning tool. So again, whenever you're doing any deadlift variation, I think the big focus needs to be on hips going back and hips going forward. If you think about up and down too much, you can end up rounding your spine to get lower, and you can end up extending your spine to move up. So realize again, if you're just thinking about hands and barbell up and down, or you're thinking about chest up and down, your spine can do a lot of that. And like we said kind of in the beginning, you want your spine to stay perfectly still, tight and rigid, and just coming along for the ride. So before you even RDL, before you even grab on anything, just realize what that feels like is your lower back should be tight. They are the muscles that prevent you from rounding, but you also want to feel like this little bit of a ribs pulled down and abs nice and tight. And get this all nice and solid. I always say if you have a hard time feeling with bracing, if someone's gonna punch you in the stomach, just how you would naturally tense, realize that's not just these abs you can see, it's a lot of stuff in your torso. So once all this is locked in and tight, then it's just about how far back can my hips go and how far forward can my hips go. And again, just this, not how far can my pelvis go in space, because I could again extend my lower back and have it go farther, but you're really just squeezing the glutes. Feel when you run out of that ugly butt feeling. I'm gonna ugly butt to the finish. When you can't ugly butt any harder, that's probably gonna be the end on this. So I'm gonna demo first real quick, and then I'm gonna have Mei Ling demo. She's gonna look a lot better than I am when she does it. But basically what you want is you want the bands right across your hips. So again, you have your hip crease. And again, where you want it most of the time is right in line with your hips or slightly below that. You don't want it pulling from above. And so all you're gonna do from there, I always say if you've got a bar on the floor, you've got it up on things, pick it up like a conventional deadlift, just because it's never good to pick something up with a rounded back. So drop down, bend the knees, use the quads, use the hips, stand all the way up tall, find that braced position. So locking my abs in place, keeping my torso nice and still. And my focus is hips back as far as I can. So as soon as my hips run out, I can't go any lower, squeeze with the glutes. So start with that ugly butt feel and hips forward, hard ugly butt into the band. So again, I could stand up much taller. I could finish it like this, but that's all back. None of that is glutes, none of that is pelvis. So I'm really just going to the point where hips back, they run out, glute squeeze, and hard glute squeeze into that band. Same thing when I'm going down. When I'm going down, when I run here, I say hips back. As soon as you run out of hip flexion, that's where you want to stop. Realize I can go much lower, but all of this all comes from my back. None of it comes from actually my hip joint anymore. So as soon as this joint runs out, that's the end of that. All the rest of the motion would be coming from spinal flexion, which is not what you're looking for. So now I'm gonna have Mei Ling demo a couple. hopefully give a couple extra cues as we're going through there.
Sure.
Same thing, drop down and pick that first one up a little bit more like a conventional deadlift. So there you go. Stand up nice and tall. So I say nice, slow negatives, especially if you're learning this. So you're just thinking hips towards the back wall. Stop, glute squeeze, and hard under. There you go. And you can see she's really initiating with her pelvis pulling. All this comes along. Stop right there. Good. Hard squeeze. We'll go 2 more like that. So thinking hips back, hips back. When this joint runs out, stop, glute squeeze, pull hard under, no low back extension. And we'll go 1 more. Good. Hard squeeze. Great. And so the first 1 or 2 times I actually showed this to Mei Ling. I'll have you show in a minute just so they can maybe see. You know, we were going to the point where she was feeling, should I go lower? But basically her hips were running out, and lower for her came from lower back rounding. And so that's a tricky part, is everybody always feels like more range of motion is better. More range of motion is better if it's coming from the train joint, not always just from the bar moving up and down. So I'm gonna have you demo 1 or 2 more. I'll have a look from the side here. See if you guys can spot the difference. So same thing.
All the way down now?
Yeah, so this one we'll see. I'll have you do it nice and slow so people can hopefully see where this stops at. So again, before she's going nice and slow, hips back, and hopefully if you look at her spine, you can see there at the end that's finishing with some rounding. So again, it takes a little bit of a look. I was really talking to her about trying to feel that position where she's going hips, 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 and there, that last little bit, hopefully you can see that subtle rounding that's happening there. Good. And so over time, if you're ever doing these, it's not bad to feel your lower back a teeny bit. So some people freak out if they, like at the end of a hard set, they're like, oh, I felt my glutes and hams, but I also felt my lower back. Again, realize your lower back, your erector muscles are responsible for maintaining this neutral position. If they did nothing and relaxed, you would just be like this. So they're responsible for holding you, you know, they're resisting the bar pulling you into flexion. So some low back feeling of those muscles working is fine. But if you're going through this and you're going from at the bottom, this slightly rounded position to extension to up, maybe some hip flexion extension, or finishing with extension, and you're getting a big lower back pump, odds are you're probably finishing maybe with a little bit too much rounding of the spine. And then if you're rounding and going back to neutral or going back to extension, you're actually going through a lot of spine motion there as well too. And the other thing I didn't touch on here is mess around with stance width as well too. So again, you know, there's pretty much no purpose to ever be this narrow, but realize everyone's femur, the shape of the femur, the neck of the femur, and really the acetabulum is where that femur sits in the side of your pelvis. They all kind of face different ways. So realizing some people, this kind of narrowish hip stance might feel great. You might feel like you get a lot of range of motion, you're not limited, but some people you might feel better, a little bit wider, toes turned out a teeny bit. So again, somewhere within reason, there's almost no point to really be going, you know, this wide, because then arguably you're not having as much pure hip flexion extension occurring. It's turning into a little bit. Yeah. It's not bad for, not as bad for some squatting type stuff, and your glutes can definitely still work, but it's going to be one of those things where you're just biasing or giving your adductors a chance to work a lot more. So that would be the big thing. So there's going to be some point where, again, and we'll take a look when we get into your squat stuff, a little wider might feel better just because of the shape of your pelvis and how your femur sits in there. But at some point in time, again, if we're actually turning the femur over, where again, the front of your femur is more this way, then we're actually putting the things where the glutes are actually not perfectly in line with the femur pulling this way, and actually adductors can do a little bit more work. So again, it's gonna be one of those things where I don't ever say that sumo is bad or that you shouldn't do it. And there is a little bit of an individual component there as well too. But for the most part, most people are gonna be from hip width to maybe somewhere outside here-ish. There's not normally a whole lot of reason to go past that, especially not for deadlifts, but maybe a little bit more for some squat variations.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I thought it was all weights.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at it, because again, I've seen some people where one, it's, you can tell things, and again, the whole glutes are still behind the joint, so they can still work a lot. It's really just about, do we want to give the adductors that much of an opportunity to work a lot as well too? So it's like, there's never one where it's like glutes are off, adductors are doing the work. It's going to be about always shifting, because even when you have this stance, your adductors can still be hip extensors, so they can still work. It's just your glutes are in a better position to do more work there. All right. So That's why this is one of my favorite movements. Again, basically it's a good range of motion, trains a lot of the glutes, through basically 80% of their contractile range, trains them where they're strongest, they can produce the most force. And the band's nice because a normal RDL, as you come to the top and that barbell is stacked, there's no tension here. You can basically just stand here all day. Whereas with that band, you have to contract and squeeze hard into it because it's actively pulling you into hip flexion. And then, like I said, for a lot of people, if you have a hard time thinking about a lot of up and down type stuff and not hips back and forward, it provides great cueing because it literally is pulling your hips back the whole time. And then when you can contract, you can focus on contracting the glutes into that band as opposed to thinking about lifting the bar up or down. So that is it, banded RDLs, one of my favorite glute exercises. If you guys are enjoying the series, please leave us some comments, feedback below, thumbs up, subscribe, all that good stuff, and come back for the next one.